the Spud Inc. Ustream for this week. Today we're going to talk about raw lifting and gear lifting and how to build your foundation, transition exercises, transitioning from raw to gear, carryover, and fundamental differences in programming. Um, I guess we'll start off with some raw lifting and how you built your foundation.
Okay. Pretty much everybody starts out raw, and I don't know of anybody that starts out lifting weights and they're like, oh, I'm gonna put some briefs on, I'm gonna put a suit on. So pretty much everybody starts out raw. Some people transition into gear a little bit faster, but you kind of have to build up a good base, raw before you can even get into gear to make it work for you. A lot of people get into gear too soon and they're not strong enough. I was kind of the opposite. I really wanted to get into gear lifting, as soon as I could. When I was, real young, that's what I wanted to do. But I kind of pulled back, and I did a lot of raw lifting for a long time before I even, got into some of the basic gear. And I know you've been doing raw lifting for a long time.
And I think one of the big things that if someone just automatically jumps right into gear right off the bat, one of the biggest issues that they're going to miss out on is taking that time to learn a lot of good body awareness. From going from raw for so long to switching over to using a couple different styles of squat briefs. One of the biggest things that I feel helps me quite a bit is I have that body awareness. I know if I'm pushing back hard enough. I can feel and tell whether I am or not. I can feel and tell if I'm pushing my knees out. A lot of other different things as well. And that's one of the other big things with the raw lifting is use that time and use that opportunity as a way to experiment with your different stances. We did a video not too long ago showing the differences between your narrow stance, your medium stance, and your wide stance. As hopefully most of you know, by the time you do get into your briefs and your squat suit, you are going to have to change that stance up a little bit. It's not going to work out all that great for you to try squatting in a pair of briefs with a canvas suit over the top of them if you're trying to do a narrow stance. It's just not going to be a pleasant thing. And if you don't go through while you're a raw lifter and take the time to kind of get yourself used to that stance and use it a few times to know what that feels, how to push the body back, how to get those knees out, so on and so forth, keeping that neutral spine while in that stance, it's also not going to be a very fun experience the very first time you put a set of briefs on and you go to do that. You're going to feel like a fish out of water for sure. So use that time as a raw lifter to learn that body awareness, experiment with your different stances, because one of the other great things about that, as we were saying, that's your time to build a good, strong foundation by messing around with and experimenting with those different stances. Each one of those stances, even though they're still hitting the same primary muscles, there's small secondary muscles that each one of those stances hit a little bit differently. And that's going to be your time to really strengthen all areas. That was one of the very first things that I noticed switching over is I spent a lot of time just with a narrow stance as a raw lifter. Every once in a blue moon I would switch my stances up, which was a huge mistake on my end, because as soon as I did put my briefs on, one of the biggest areas that I noticed was weak on me was my adductor and abductor area. And now I've went through and I've done some assistant movements to strengthen those areas, but it was a huge weakness that I could tell as soon as I had those briefs on. So again, just really use that time to build that foundation, work all those different muscle angles, experiment with the stances. That way, by the time you do put the briefs on, you're going to know what's going to be the best stance for you. Maybe you'll be able to go with just a little bit of a mid stance. Maybe you'll have to actually go out to a full wide stance. But if you don't take that time to figure that stuff out, it's going to be a nightmare for you once you do get those briefs on, for sure.
My experience started, I didn't get into powerlifting until I was age 30. So I spent a lot of time doing, it was all raw. I didn't even know what gear was until I started powerlifting in the late 90s. So most of mine was, close stance squatting, a little bit of experimentation on my own, but basically that was that was the root of it. And when we switched up to sort of a West Side system, when it was all West Side when we first started, and then we started doing wide stance box squats and all those other things, I firmly believe that the experimentation early on, trying to figure out where you feel the best on your stance, trying out different things. I mean, even though you're getting them from back then you got them from the magazines, you didn't have the internet or anything like that. You just went in there and you followed whoever's program was in Muscle Fitness or Flex or whatever, and you just tried to mimic those things and try to find that's called finding your way through it and trying to figure out things, trying to figure out the best way things work. So that type of lifting helped prepare me for when I went to a program like West Side system. So as he was saying earlier, this is one of the fundamental things I tell people is completely switch your stances all around. When I first started getting into the gear stuff, everybody was extremely wide. So I went extremely wide, but that makes you a teeter-totter effect. If you don't hit it just right, you're going to either go forward or backward with it. Your head's down. I mean, you can watch some of my videos and a lot of other videos, but it's too wide. And after a period of time, I found out that some of my muscles weren't responding as well, and I had to bring it into a medium stance. Some of my some of my first 1,000-pound plus geared squats, I had more of a medium stance than I did a wide stance. So it was a constant experimentation trying to find out the best leverages. And they're going to change with injuries, they're going to change with time, they're going to change with weaknesses, they're going to change with all those things that happen over lifting. But early on, fundamental raw lifting, and even in the West Side, it's all raw. The first programming phase, it's all raw stuff. You're doing raw good mornings, you're doing raw low box squats, you're doing all these things to help build up all those things you never even heard of in your whole life. So that, you want to have a large base trying to figure out and experiment with it. That's what these two are saying. He had the different experience than I did. I was, because I didn't know about powerlifting really, all raw until a certain age, and then it was gear. And he knew about gear because he grew up in the gear age. Well, the higher gear age. It's always been gear around, but as gear started progressing and getting better and better, and new forms and everything else everybody started working on technique and skill. That's when he came up and had a little different experience with it. But in the end, you still got to go back and work the raw stuff in order to make the gear stuff better, and vice versa. So.
Yep, gotta be strong raw to be strong in gear. That's for sure.
Very much so.
Hopefully that made a little bit of sense to you. Sometimes I get to rambling and it's all over the place. I guess the next phase we want to talk about is the transition exercises that can help transition, raw to gear work. What have you found that works?
Well, I mean, a lot of people don't really know how to transition. They just come to a gym and say you've been training in a regular gym, you've been kind of wanting to get into powerlifting, so you experiment with it a little bit yourself, and then you get to a powerlifting gym, and everybody tries to throw a pair of briefs on you, and they're like, okay, you got to squat out here, So you throw a pair of briefs on and you squat way out wide, and then your knees cave in, and you're like, I hate this gear shit. It's awful. I'm gonna hurt something. I'm gonna fall down. Well, if you don't train those muscles, when you're raw, like Justin was saying, to get that foundation built up, you're going to suck when you get in gear because you don't have those muscles developed. So what you kind of want to do is to work on those muscles with, a few different kind of more, powerlifting, like gear-oriented exercises, like the box squat, to really work those adductors and abductors, like Justin was saying when he found out, when he got in briefs, he's like, man, I'm pretty weak in these areas, and it's causing form issues. So that's where you want to kind of get, like Spud was saying, transition into, going narrow stance all the time, to widen your feet out a little bit, play with it a little bit, and then start doing some box squats where that's really going to develop your hip strength, so you can actually hold your knees in the position that they're supposed to be in, instead of them caving in as soon as you widen your feet out or turn your toes out or something like that. So the box squat's going to be one of your best friends, transitioning from an all raw, into getting ready to get into gear.
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything Dale's saying. Really take advantage of, the things like the box squat, stuff like that. Also your assistance work. There's a lot of things that can be said for the proper assistance work. If you don't necessarily have, you say the gym you go to for some odd reason doesn't have a reverse hyper, which if they don't, I really apologize, and I feel bad for you. But make sure you're getting your good mornings. Get that back strong. There's a lot of little muscle groups though that people neglect on a constant basis, and it's not because they're doing it purposely. I think a lot of times it's because they don't even realize how well those muscles will help them. Over the years, I found that there's a lot of people that neglect training and strengthening the psoas, the QL muscle, which is what, Dale?
Quadratus lumborum.
Look at that. Dale knows what this muscle is.
It's
if you
early.
don't know what this muscle is, and Dale knows, then you need to do some research.
That's right.
I know the general vicinity of those muscles, but specifically, I can't remember half the damn names for them.
That's why I
As
say
long as you
things
know
like
where they
QL.
are. As long as you know where they are.
But learn what those muscles are. Don't be afraid to pick up a book and find out what some of these muscles are, and figure out ways to strengthen them. One of my favorite ones for the QL muscle is I do what's called a butt walk, which a lot of you out there are probably going, what the heck is he talking about? I've never heard of that. So I promise you, here soon I will do a video and we will post it of me doing butt walks. That way everybody can see what the butt walks are. That way you can start implementing these into your training. Believe it or not, even you raw squatters out there, it'll help you as well. Your squats will love you for it, I promise you. But just little things, like he was saying, changing your stance up, hitting all those different muscle angles, implementing the box. If you don't necessarily have one of the, for a long time whenever I do box squats, I didn't have an actual box. Luckily the gym that I was at, we had a whole slew pot of 45-pound bumpers though, which I found that in my opinion that could possibly be one of the most useful things for a 45-pound bumper, is to stack and turn into a box.
Anything works.
So there's, just because you don't have some of the implements that you see at some of these bigger gyms like Westside and stuff like that, like Spud just said, anything works. Sometimes you have to be a little creative. Believe it or not, I found a way at one time. I was at a gym, they did not have a leg curl, did not have a leg extension. I figured out how to use the reverse hyper to do that. I got a lot of weird looks, but it worked. That's another thing, don't be afraid, just because you're a power lifter, don't be afraid to hit some of those movements as well, some of your leg extensions, your leg curls. It's just going to be strengthening, again, it's strengthening the muscles that you need in order to help you achieve these lifts, whether you are raw or you're an equipped lifter.
Wouldn't you say that also that if you constantly stay in a certain format, certain muscles are going to get a little bit weaker. They're not
very much so.
They're not going to be in action as much.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be incorporated as much. So, doing the little things like leg extensions, doing the even leg curls, not my most awesome favorite because you can cheat all over it, but whatever. Using all those fundamental bodybuilding exercises to help strengthen up and keep your points that aren't used as much, the muscle groups that, depending on what you do in competition, if you're super wide or close or whatever you are, using those exercises to help keep the other muscles up, the hypertrophy, and keep the size on them, keep them working.
Spud just said it best, and brought up a really good point. The fundamental bodybuilding exercises. When I first got into powerlifting, one of the first books that I read that really kind of spoke to me a little bit as far as a few things about powerlifting was a book by Jim Wendler, and I read a few of his articles. And it was either in his book or is in one of his articles. I can't remember. I just remember the little, real short paragraph and what it talked about. In his opinion, one of the most important things that a powerlifter needed to remember was anytime they walked into the gym, they needed to walk in with the mindset of a bodybuilder. Now, that he wasn't saying that you needed to go in and do a whole bunch of hypertrophy stuff like that.
Muscle building.
Muscle building. What he's saying is, any of you that know anything about bodybuilding out there, the most absolute important thing to a bodybuilder is symmetry, is having the body completely balanced. So go in with that mindset. Ask yourself, what do I need to do to make my body equally as balanced all the way around, from the front to the back? What do I need to do to make my hamstrings just as strong as my quad? I really don't like it when people start talking about how I'm an extremely quad dominant person, or I'm an extremely hamstring dominant person. If you're training properly, eventually they are going to balance out with each other. If they're not, you are neglecting stuff.
Let me interject one thing in here, and this is something I tell people. A lot of people don't even know they have a weakness, so they have no idea about it. And this is my own theory. I've never proved it. Blah blah blah. But there's always a correlation between each muscle group. So if you can go do, let's just take an exercise like leg extension. If you're doing the whole stack on the leg extension, and you're going to the leg curl, and you're only doing a quarter or a third of it, what does that tell you?
It means you're weak.
Yeah.
It means your hamstrings aren't up to par with your quad. I'm not saying you need to do the whole stack, but there needs to be a correlation. So if you did the whole stack on, say, one thing, and then you went to work your hamstrings and you only did a third of it, they're weaker. But if you could do half or a little bit more, still keeping that, maybe two-thirds or three-quarters of it, there's your correlating factors as far as muscle groups. So that, that's a way that I try to help people identify things, is, look for big differences between groups. And that's one thing about bodybuilding stuff, is you can see big differences between groups.
Very much so.
If your back sucks, if you got say you got a 315, 365 bench, and you go over and you pull down stuff and you're doing 100 pounds, what's that tell you? That means your back sucks, it's not supporting the work.
Yep.
And you're relying on your shoulders, you're relying on your pecs. And it sounds, if you can bench that much with that, you got a little bit of tricep strength in there too. But if you bring the back up, the back is the base, the support to where you push it off of. It's the whole base, So you just look for the differences between, and that's just the way I kind of figured things out. Was, if I can't do a ham glute raise when I first started, and they sucked really bad, there's a reason why you can't do a ham glute raise. Is your hamstrings and your glutes aren't cooperating, and they aren't strong, and they're not up to par. But yeah, you can go to the squat rack and squat 315 or close stance or 4 or 5, whatever. So that's sort of another way to think about it.
And that's a big part of staying healthy. Justin said, bodybuilders call it symmetry, and we would call it weak point training, because you want to be symmetrical, you want to be in proportion, strength-wise, your quads and hamstrings and everything like that, to stay healthy. If your hamstrings are really weak and your quads are really strong, chances are you got a lot of hamstring problems, because you're going to have pulls and tears, because they're getting dominated. They're not
Your
going to.
back's going to take the load as well.
Yeah, we've got a lot of lifters in here that have crappy hamstrings. They don't work them enough, so they pull all the back. When they deadlift and stuff like that, they don't take the time to really work their hamstrings. And you're going to run into injuries when that kind of stuff comes around. So that's why you want to you can be symmetrical if you want to call it bodybuilder, but you don't want to be weak in any area. It's a hole in your game you got to fix to maximize your potential to lift the max weight that you can, but also to stay healthy. That's the main thing is in powerlifting is staying healthy. Because if you can't push it, then you're not going to get any stronger.
I want to go back to, we were talking about transition exercises, and they both talked about the box squat as well. A frequent problem I see with people on box squats is they have the box too low to start with, so they bottom out. In other words, they squat on the box, they get to a certain point, and then they give out. Either the tail gives out, which I call dog pooping squats. If you can't hold your arch like this, and you get to the bottom, and you sit on the box like that. That's what a dog does, it's taking a poop. So you let it go because you can't hold it. You're not strong enough. So I tell people, raise the box up to the point where, when it's about to give out, that's when that's where you got to start your work from. And I think, and he was talking about the, learning your body and learning how to feel everything, learning what to use and what to incorporate. I think the box squat applies just as much to a raw lifter as it does to a gear lifter or transition. You don't have to use the box the same way raw, because there's always that contention, the drop and pop, and all those other things. Between everybody's got their opinion about it, but if you use the box as a tool to learn how to feel your way down, and feel those actual things working, like your hamstrings, your glutes, your hips kicking in, when are your hip flexors giving out, what's paying the price that's not doing the job. So they work for both things. Another thing I like, and I haven't done them in a long time, but I learned in the kettlebell school, was wall squats. I think wall squats are fantastic for helping you, get your form. No matter what you do, you can't really do a close stance with a wall squat. You can do a medium or wide, and that will teach you how to keep yourself upright, arching, because you can't touch the wall. Once you touch the wall, it's over. So you have to learn how to get all the way down and keeping your body in the proper squat position.
How close should you be to the wall when you do a wall squat? Where should your feet be?
Usually I have mine probably 2 to 3 inches.
Okay. So the reason I ask that, and it for some reason infuriates me. I see everybody talking about doing wall squats, and they're like, "Oh, this fixed my form. It's perfect. My squat form's great," and they're standing a foot away from the damn wall. And they're like, "I'm not touching the wall, my form's great."
Yeah.
No, you're not, because you're not doing it right. 2 to 3 inches away from the wall, and if you can squat, without touching the wall, then you're squatting well. If you're a foot away and you're not touching the wall, you're not doing it right. So that's just one of those things that a lot of people don't know, where to set up for a wall squat. 2 to 3 inches away, and if your face touches the wall, you need to push back harder. You need to, arch harder and all that kind of stuff.
So either work from a higher box until you lose form. Once you lose form, that's where you know where you got to be. Or when you're doing your wall squats are going to simulate the same thing. They're going to simulate the feel, and that's really learning your body. But a wall squat makes your whole body lock in together. And then we talked about it in the videos, the uniting of the body, the keeping the kinematic system together, locking all the chains together. That's what we're talking about. Once you do that, once you do a wall squat right, you'll understand your squat a whole lot better. And you'll understand what hurts really bad when you're going down and what's not helping you out. Because it won't be there.
I think next we want to talk about, so you kind of got the raw training down and you're thinking about getting into gear, but how do you get into gear? You train your body up to be prepared to handle a little bit of gear now, but where do you start? In my experience, I held off on training with gear for a long time, and then when I did start dabbling with it, it was the baby stuff. It was the little, the least amount of gear that I could get on. I started out with an Inzer Blast shirt. It's pretty much like wearing 2 Under Armour shirts. You're not going to get a whole lot, but I was like, okay, I'll start there.
That much? You got that much out of it?
Maybe.
More like one Under Armour shirt.
So, everybody's a little bit different, but I would recommend starting. You don't have to start with a bottom rung on the pole, but you don't want to start out with something that's super crazy, harder to learn and overpowers you. I started working my way up. I started, my briefs, were like legless Titan briefs that were, god awful, and I hated them. And soon I transitioned into something a little bit better. And then like the Inzer, I think the Z suit was my first ever squat suit. And now, I'm up into the Titan ball suit. Everybody uses different stuff, but we've got a whole bunch of different gear. We're going to kind of show the different phases of gear lifting that you can kind of work your way into. What do we want to show first, guys?
That's a good question.
You want to finish up with the talk. You ever use gear that much?
Yeah.
You want to talk about your experience with it?
Yeah.
Real quick?
For me, mine was a little bit different than Dale's. I've been raw squatting and lifting for pretty much my whole entire career, and finally I had someone ask me if I wanted to try some gear, and I was like, sure, what do you got? The only thing they had was a set of Inzer double ply Predator briefs. That was the very first thing of gear that I ever put on, was double ply Predator briefs. So I just kind of dove right into it. It was like, here we go, if we're going to do this, go big, go home. But now that I squatted with them a couple different times, and since then I've gotten where I implement a few other things now. I still have not used a shirt of any kind. The closest I get to that is I use some kind of
one your size.
Yeah, that's the hard thing. Don't let the nickname Yeti throw you off. I know it's hard to tell on camera, but I am actually a little guy.
Yeah, 161 today. What are you talking
161.8, folks. That is the price of a soda these days.
That's what I was about to say. That's not a weight. It's the price of a drink. It's almost the price of a drink.
Almost price of a drink. But now I use a few other things, and I mix it up a little bit. I don't always train in all the same gear. Like I said, whenever I bench, the closest thing I come to any kind of gear is some kind of slingshot apparatus. When I squat on my speed days, I wear my handy dandy little single ply Inzer power pants.
Girls softball pants.
They are not girls softball pants. But man, it was hard getting them away from that softball team. And then on my max effort days, I'll go ahead and throw these on, and then I put my Inzer double ply Predator briefs on, which some of you may be thrown off a little bit when you see them because I got the loops on them. They do not come that way from Inzer. I had to have those sewn on. It's just a way to help you get them on a little bit. You can hang from squat racks, things like that, wiggle around, do a fancy little dance to get them on then. And it was, it's definitely been an experience. I kind of, because like I said, unfortunately, when I was raw lifting, I didn't spend a lot of time messing around with my different stances like I should have. So in a roundabout way, I've kind of had to reteach myself how to squat a little bit. But luckily, having that body awareness that we were talking about earlier has helped speed that process up a little bit.
My first experience was the Franz double ply briefs. They really aren't much better than the girls softball pants over there. That was my first run with it, but it's a good start. When you pick out gear to start with, you want gear that it's not too hard to manipulate, because you have to learn how to train right. As the gear goes up, the gear will manhandle you if you don't take care of the gear. The gear is meant to go in a certain direction. You have to force it in another direction to get the biggest carryover from it and the pull from it. Otherwise, it's going to pull you down and pull you away, or pull your knees together. So you have to build that strength up over time. But you want to start with some lighter gear to work your way up and help build up the foundation. But also to kind of wake up those muscles before you try to put on something heavy. Like the double Predator briefs, or the Boss briefs here, the cheese hole briefs, and metal Ace briefs. There's a million of them out there, so we can go on and on about that.
Yeah, I remember the first time I actually put on. I used a lot of Mark's, kind of hand-me-down gear. He had a Viking squatter, and it was still too big on me. I think I was like 275, and he was, 280, 290, but, a lot more solid than I was at 275.
I was?
Yeah.
I don't remember
And
all the cookie thing.
I think I took like 8.5 and ended up on my face the first time I ever squatted down with it, because it, like he said, it manhandled me. It shot my hips forward, and, I ended up in the safety straps, luckily, because nobody was even fast enough to catch it, because I sucked that bad at using gear. So it took me a while to figure out the stronger stuff. some of the lighter gear that we've got, this is probably the first ever real strong suit that I had, and it's an Enzer, squat suit, the hardcore Enzer, and it's a double ply, and I was like, ooh, it's a double ply, and now I don't think much of it, but back then, I was like, I felt like the king of the world. I'm using a 2-ply suit. I think I squatted like 800, in it, and that was my first ever 800 squat. I thought I was doing something, which.
Had you realized now that it wasn't that strong, would you have squatted 800?
I would have tried for much more. I would have tried for much
but,
more.
That's the idea as years progressed over the years. When you start out with that and work your way up, but he thought that was like the ultimate, super suit going on. And, that's how much, I'm going off track just a tad, but that's how much his brain was excited about the suit. And in my opinion, that probably helped him out to get 800 squat.
Oh yeah.
Otherwise, it might have been had he thought about the suit differently, it might have been 750.
I felt like I was driving a Rolls Royce. I thought I was awesome.
So suits will make you feel awesome, but you got to know how to use them.
Very much so.
Yeah. Probably, I know, Spud, you squatted in this one, didn't you?
This was my first real suit.
These are old.
This is going back in time, way back in time. The Fran's double canvas or 2-ply canvas suit, and really, to the canvas nowadays, this is really not much.
No.
So, and I used it in a couple different weight classes. Don't ask me how. I got extended out and all that stuff. But I squatted high 6s with it, or low 7s, something like that. And the last time I used it, I squatted 965 in it with Boss briefs, the cheese briefs underneath of it. So the canvas is a lot more supportive in the hole. It doesn't give you, to me, it doesn't give you the same stretch, but it definitely has the stopping power and to hold you in place, and then you can reverse the squat back up. So that's my experience with this suit here, the Fran's double ply. I'm not even sure if they make them anymore. I don't think so. But there you go.
I think, there's all kind of different suits out there. This is what I've kind of progressed to, and I really enjoy it. I've squatted in metal, and it does well for a lot of people. And I was, fortunate enough to get a Boss suit for a pretty good price. So I was like, I'll try it, and that's what I'm using now. I really like it pretty well. It gives you good rebound, good stopping power, and it's a little different than some of the other suits out there. I think it's just, I could be wrong. Correct me if I am somebody, but it's just a really thick single ply layer. But it really does well for me. I get good pop out of the hole. Maybe it is 2-ply, is what it says. But yeah, I think a couple 2 or 3 weeks ago I did a meet and squatted 950 in it. So it gives me pretty good carryover. I like it a lot. But it doesn't manhandle me too much. My hips are strong enough now to where I can use the suit for my benefit, and instead of it throwing me around too much. But if I get lazy, I've had it happen where I kind of don't think about a weight hard enough or don't respect it, and it throws my knees forward, or gets my hips out of alignment because I'm not paying attention and pushing back like I'm supposed to. So even somebody that's been in gear for almost 8-9 years, it still kind of throws me out of whack sometimes. So that's something that you want to always respect the weight and know the kind of gear you're squatting in can throw you around.
Yeah, well, I'll chime in on that. This is the metal squatter here. I started in the Viking squatter, and the Viking squatter was great. And I used the Viking Pro briefs, I think, and it didn't manhandle you as much. But then they came out with the Ace, and the Ace was a whole lot more. And I went Ace on Ace, and this was a couple weeks before one of the major meets, and it threw me all over the place. So, but being the not so bright guy I am, I went ahead and rolled with the Ace. But I also learned how to force and manhandle the Ace to stretch it out. And I think the jack's very similar to that. I haven't had as much experience with the jack, but the ace squatter for metal is, you know, it's my favorite because I've done all my big squats in it. You know, I never got to use the Boss. I used the Boss cheese briefs, and I call them cheese briefs because they got holes in them. You cut holes in them because they're standard sizes, and everybody's a different size. So, you know, I was a little bit fatter, so I would cut the holes in it to stretch it out and fit me, so it wouldn't cut the circulation off or dig in too far. So, that's sort of where I ended as far as I got ended by the 1,200 pounds, but that's sort of the progression. You know, I did the marathon suit by itself in the beginning, and then I got the Franz double ply briefs, and then you know we progressed to the Franz with the Franz canvas with the Franz double ply briefs. And then the next progression was the Boss suit and the Franz, and then the next progression was Ace on Ace, which was, you know, I found for me was the perfect fit. So as you can see, it's a ratcheting up as I got stronger, as I got bigger, as I got better, as I got more adapted to the situation, and learned how to manhandle the suits correctly. You know, I kept pushing it up. So.
I haven't been in a suit yet. Soon.
Very
soon. Very soon.
Very soon, and you're probably going to jump in, aren't you? Jump in and get a good suit, like you did with your double ply brief.
Yeah. I don't know why I don't know why, considering I've never been in a suit, but for some odd reason, I keep hearing the word canvas in my head. So I think the first suit that I'm going to go with will probably be some kind of insert canvas. So we'll see. That's something everybody will have to stay tuned for.
But you can take that Franz right there and put it on.
I don't think that's going to fit.
It's been fixed a couple of times, so you know.
But yeah, so and I've went back and forth. I've thought about the Inzer, and I've also thought about the Boss. But I think the Inzers are the ones I'm going to try first. We'll see.
All right, so we're going to roll over into carryover between the two.
Okay, what does gear actually do to you?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I'll talk about this one for a second. A lot of you may not know, I'm new to this area. I'm not originally from the South. I'm from the Midwest, and over in the Midwest, we don't have a whole lot of geared squatters or lifters, period. It's starting to get a little bit more popular. It used to be really popular in the Midwest for a long time, around the Missouri, Kansas area. Then it died out. Everybody went raw. And now we have a lot of lifters that are trying to get back into it. And since I've kind of switched over and started implementing the gear into my training, I get asked all the time, what is it exactly that the gear does, especially since I do a lot of rehab work. I get asked weird questions like that all the time. The easiest way to explain it that I found to kind of get it through, a lot of people say, of course, you heard Dale and Spud talk about, you know, the stretch, the stopping power, how the suits can actually hold you in place and stuff like that. Those are things that they do help with. One of the most important things is I want everyone to stop and think for a second about, say you're getting ready to squat a load that's at about your 75%. You climb underneath the bar, you unrack it. There's going to be something that happens to your body right off the bat. The very first thing that's going to happen is you should feel a certain area tighten up. And that area will be everything from your waist to your knee. What's happening is your body, without you thinking about it, just instinctively, it wants that joint compressed, especially when there is a load on top of it. It's trying to keep it safe. Your body goes into, without you thinking about it, it goes into a safety mode. So it squeezes all the glute and hip muscles to compress that joint, because if it doesn't, say this is my hip socket, this is the head of my femur, if it wasn't to compress that, what would happen is they'd go right on top of each other. And then you'd try moving and you'd be getting a whole bunch of this going on, which can be very painful. So what happens is those muscles As soon as that load starts to compress it, those muscles squeeze and they open it up. That way it can move freely now however it needs to side, back and forth, so on and so forth. Well, what happens with that is whenever you're squatting now and you're squatting raw, you have about 40% of your muscular strength is compressing the joint. So what ends up happening is you're left with about 60% of your actual muscular strength to actually move that load up and down. Whenever I put my couple layers of briefs here on, they are so tight. I mean, as you can see, these are extremely little. I am not actually that little of a guy. My legs, believe it or not, my legs are a little bit bigger than that. But they're extremely tight on me, and what happens is now that's compressing my joint for me. It's adding a whole bunch of compression to that joint to where now, instead of using 40% of my muscular strength to compress my joint, the briefs are helping with that. And they're doing a lot of that compression work for me. So now I'm able to run at a lot higher percentage of my actual muscular strength to actually move the load. For a lot of you out there that think that it's just the gear has, I've had people ask me, well, is the gear real springy or real stretchy like knee wraps or something like that? No. If I grab my briefs, you can see they don't stretch. Sometimes I wish they did. It'd be a lot easier to get these dang things on. But they don't. So it doesn't have that little spring pop that some people think it does. It's just really tight, really compressed, and it's keeping that joint in a safe position. And you're able to use more muscle to move a load. That's why a lot of times when people put these on, they are able to go ahead and move a bigger weight because they have more muscle doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that's moving a load. That's the easy way to explain it. I could get a lot more technical if you wanted to, but we'd be here for a few hours.
Well, I mean, and this is, again, this is not proved, but this is my experience with it. You know, when you're wearing gear, and I started out raw, and then I moved in a little bit of gear, and then I went through a lot of gear. Then over the past, after I met my major tear, I've been pretty much raw. Occasionally I put some gear on. But not only does the gear put you in better leverages, but they keep you in the leverages to where your weak points can't affect you as much.
Very much so.
So you can hold more load. Additionally, and this is my perspective, is the body can take a whole lot more load, but because of weaknesses in joints and everything else, you can't put that load on to train the body how to handle that load. So when you put gear on, you change obviously the central nervous system activity. You change up how much load is lit up. You change up, the body's going into a fight mode. It's going into the fight mode to help you support the load and keep you from killing yourself or breaking something loose. So that's the other perspective of gear lifting that a lot of people don't understand is, and like I said, coming from raw to geared, I can tell you right now, I can go back. Pretty much right now, I can do a whole lot more than I ever could when I started at age 30, because I built up so much strength and so much nervous system activity and so much ability to light up and be in the right positions that my raw lifting is much stronger than it was when I first started.
So you're saying there's actually carryover to using gear to raw lifting?
Yep, very much so.
Yep.
Very much so.
A lot of people don't think that.
There is.
But a lot of people are wrong, because I've experienced a lot of that myself, and I'm sure you've seen your raw lifts go up, even after just using briefs when you go back to raw squat. I'll talk about that a little bit, because a lot of people have misconceptions that geared lifting is here and raw lifting is here and they can't intermingle. A lot of raw lifters are missing out on the opportunity to actually get stronger in your raw lifts by using a little bit of gear. I'm not saying you have to go do geared competitions or geared people should go do raw competitions, which I I have done, and I highly recommend it for geared lifters. But they don't exist in two separate worlds. They have a place together, and each are going to help each other out. You know, just from my personal experience, last year, or I guess it was last year, I tore my pec, and I said, well, I'm pretty stupid. I want to get back real quick, so I told myself I'm going to make sure that I'm ready to get back in gear before I do. So I did a raw meet, and I said I'm going to do a raw meet and get a total before I even put a shirt on, to make sure I wasn't going to be really stupid and put a shirt on and get torn up again. So in that experience, I did a lot of raw training, after I did gear training. And I noticed that a lot of the raw lifts that I was doing, I was squatting twice a week. I did low bar squats to train, my competition squat. And then I did high bar squats just to bump up the volume a little bit and get a little bit more muscle on me. And my deadlift jumped. My raw deadlift jumped. And then,
A lot.
Yeah. Because
Major change.
Because it strengthened up my back a lot more.
How much would you say it went up?
I mean, it was,
I would think about 50 pounds.
I was going to say, 40, 50 pounds.
And that's a significant jump for a deadlift.
Yeah, because my deadlift had been stuck for a long time. Hell, I outbenched my deadlift. I hate to admit that on camera, but
I
yeah,
did it a lot.
yeah, Spud did it too,
But
so I didn't feel too bad. But yeah, so doing those high bar raw squats, just to, in my mind, I was adding some more strength and some more muscle and stuff like that, for my squat. But it carried over, great for my deadlift, and for my geared pull. I'm stronger and I can stay in much better positions and use much better leverage because I did all that raw work. So there's a definite, carryover to geared lifting, from what you can get from raw.
A couple things I'd like to add is, like he was talking about, there's so many people that think that the raw and the geared quote worlds can't coexist. I do it every day. I squat every single time I squat in training. I have my briefs on, and one of the biggest things from squatting years raw, I could always remember. It wasn't squat day that I dreaded. It was the day after or 2 days after squat training that I dreaded. That horrible feeling. My hips felt like crap. My lower back was, tight and shot. Now that I use briefs, I don't have that issue. Because again, like I was explaining earlier, where the briefs add so much support and compression, it allows me to squat to, I guess the best way to put it is to my greatest potential per se, in the safest manner. So in my opinion, for a lot of raw squatters out there, if you're not taking advantage of a set, even if it's something just as simple as these little single ply briefs, if you're not taking advantage of those in your training, you're really missing out. Because at the end of the day, I know for me, I don't know how it is for you, but for me, it's not necessarily what I do today that matters to me. It's what am I going to be able to do 10 years from now. I plan on being in this game for as long as I can, so I'm going to take every safety measure that I can, and if that means strapping on a set of briefs to help keep my hips safe, I'm going to do it. But as Dale was saying, there is a huge carryover. I know for me, competition-wise, the best squat I've ever done in competition raw, in the 165s was low 400s. And I'm hitting, mid 5s in training with briefs on. And the other day, just to kind of see where my raw was, we started loading the bar up. And just from being able to do the overload training, get my central nervous system used to having such a heavier weight on my back, by the time we got to 450, I was unracking it and standing there with it and getting ready to squat. It felt like in all honesty, it felt like I had like a high 200s on my back. It really didn't feel like hardly anything. And I hit it for a raw squat, felt great. So there is a big carryover to it, unlike a lot of people think. It's just also making sure that you're using the gear appropriately to help you get those carryovers. That's the main thing. Just don't throw the briefs and everything on and think, okay, well, I'm using them now, so yep, Justin said I'm going to get a huge carryover, and then when you don't come yell at me. Make sure that you're doing the things that you need to in order to get the most out of those briefs for your training.
So we're also gonna talk a little bit about programming between the two. This is a little add-on to today's repertoire. How the differences between raw programming and gear programming. One of the main things I would say is the volume has to be higher for the raw.
Yes.
But again, you got to build up over time with the geared stuff. If you're light into the gear, then you're going to need a lot more work. But the volume levels are going to be different than they would be with the geared squats, because here's a way to look at it. You're trying to load the body and teach it how to deal with a certain amount of weight, right? So if you're doing, say you're 1,000-pound squatter and you got your gear on, when you're doing gear work, at that high level, you're requiring a whole lot more nervous system activity. The body's going to get wiped out quicker. So, singles, doubles, triples, that's about the top end as far as the gear stuff's going to be. Now with the raw stuff, you want to equal out you want that same feeling to the body. You want that same amount of nervous system activity. So you got to increase the volume rep-wise, in my opinion. I'm not a raw expert, but I've done a decent amount. He's obviously done a lot more, and Dale's done his share for meets too. I think you have to increase the amount of reps and sets per session,
and really know how to manipulate your percentages and use those. Because as Spud was saying, it's about getting that nervous system ready. Because when we're in the briefs and everything, we're going to go about it just a little bit different. It's going to be a lot of singles, doubles, triples. We are going to be at a bigger load, since we are basically overload training per se. So if you're a raw lifter and you try doing that, you're going to say you're going through let's say just a 12-week meet cycle, and you just right off the bat you're hitting some really heavy loads, trying to get it for lots of reps. You're going to burn your central nervous system out, and you're never going to reach that peak. You're just going to kind of hit a wall, and your peak's up here, and you're trying to get up there. You're going to hit right about here, and then you're going to taper back down. So really knowing how to manipulate your percentages, knowing when to switch your percentages as far as going from 70% to 75, and then to 80, 85, 85 plus 5, so on and so forth. To start working that nervous system and start getting it used to having those bigger loads is very, very important.
And one of those things that I'm a big believer in, kind of train by feel. Sometimes you've got your percentages set forth that you're supposed to hit that night. And I know when I was training raw, sometimes I'd have numbers that I want to hit. Okay, I want to do maybe 2 to 3 sets, at 75 to 80%, for doubles or triples. And when you're warming up, warm-ups are warm-ups. Sometimes you can tell how it's going to go. Sometimes you feel like crap and you have a stellar workout. And sometimes you feel great and you suck that night. But it's one of those, when you hit your working weights, that's kind of what matters, how you feel. Some days you got it, and some days you don't. And one thing that I've noticed different is, in gear, you can have technical flaws and you can, feel like crap, and the next set you can turn it around and fix it, and the rest of the night goes great. Whereas with raw, sometimes you don't have it that day.
Yeah.
And that's when you kind of have to figure out, like he was saying, you overload your CNS, and it takes a long time for you to recover when you do that. So you don't want to hit that wall. If you feel yourself, when you're training and you're hitting your first set, and you're like, man, that was a lot. That was about all I had in me. and you have to do 3 more sets, you got to figure out where's the good stopping point. Some people can push on through and excel, and that's awesome, if you can do that. But me, when I was training, if I had 3 sets lined up and I hit my first one, and I was like, ooh, that was pretty rough. I hit my second one, and I was like, that's about all I got. I'm done.
Yep.
That's it. Call it.
Or you can back down the weight a little bit too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause it's all about, like he's saying, it's all about what you get that day. Another way to look at it, and I'm not sure I'm using it in the right context, is RPE, rate of perceived exertion, and it's whatever. That's what you feel like that day.
Yeah.
Some days you may feel 110%. Some days you may feel 90%.
To kind of add to that, and this is not something I came up with. I actually learned this from 2 other coaches. It's the 80, what we call the 80-10-10 rule for raw lifting. Biggest majority of the time, you're going to be running at about 80% during your training. So those are your normal days when everything's feeling like it should. You're good. You go in, hit everything you're supposed to. Every once in a while, you're going to have what we call a plus 10 day. Take advantage of those days. Those are the days to look forward to. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to maybe on your assistance work, add in just a little bit of extra assistance work. What I used to do is, say I went through and I hit, when I was having those plus 10% days, I hit all my working sets on something. I'd go ahead and I'd maybe hit one more set and add like 5 or 10 pounds, or I'd remember that, and there've been times that I everything felt really good, so I was like, you know what, I'm only supposed to hit 5 on this set, but I'm gonna push my last set and see if I can maybe get maybe if I can get a couple more reps, and then that would allow me what I called a buy up for next week. That gave me an indicator that next week I'm okay to push a little bit more weight. But then unfortunately, there's the dreaded minus 10% days. Those are the days where maybe you didn't get enough meals, maybe you didn't get enough sleep the night before, maybe work was really stressful. There's a lot of different factors, but you're going to go in, you're going to feel sluggish, everything's going to feel like shit. And those are the days that Dale's talking about. Those are the days you got to figure it out. You got to listen to your body and know when enough is enough. There has literally been days that I've had those. I've went in, I got to my first working set, and I was like, man, this feels like 1,000,000 pounds on my back. Took a little bit extra rest, came back, hit the next set, still felt rough. I mustered just enough courage to get my final set in. I called it right then and there. Didn't even bother doing any assistance work. Just said, you know what? If I keep pushing myself the way everything's going today, I'm going to do more harm than good. Called it, got some rest, got some food in me and stuff like that. And then the next most important thing is I pushed it out of my head. I did not let that affect my next training day. Just push it out of your head. Remember that those days happen. Come in the next day and kill whatever you're supposed to kill training-wise. Because if you do, again, if you do try pushing it, there's a good chance that you're going to fry yourself. That is, when you're having those days, that is your body's way of telling you, you probably don't need to be training today. Something's not right. And if you push through it, you're going to either fry that central nervous system, you're going to pull or strain something, or even worse, you're going to tear something. So
and you're also going to reinforce bad form, because
exactly.
You're going to struggle really hard to get something, and then your recovery is, if you continue to go into the that zone where you're just struggling really hard, you're not building any volume, you're not building any strength. You're reinforcing bad form, and you're not improving your skill set. So, like these guys are saying, those are the days you just kind of pull back a little bit, either drop the weight, you don't get what you get that day, or you just call it a day and you move on to some light auxiliary to loosen you up, or some rehab work, so that your body will recover and be able to be ready for the next part of your training cycle.
Exactly.
So, the only other thing I'd like to talk about is, where would you, like, say you were a pure raw squatter, where would you add in this part of some light gear work?
In my training,
Yeah, what part would you, where would you add it in at? Because that's a frequent question people really want to know is, where would I put this in a cycle to help improve, my raw squat?
Well, of course, there's a couple different ways that I'm going to do it. If I don't have any kind of meet or anything like that coming up, I'll go ahead and whatever little quote unquote off season cycle I'm in, I'll run the briefs the whole time. Now, if I'm actually on a cycle on my way to get ready for a meet, I'm going to start with the briefs in the beginning. That way I get a little bit of that overload training, so on and so forth. And then what's going to happen is the closer I get to the meet, probably I'm going to say somewhere around, depending on how everything's feeling, how many weeks I have up until the meet, somewhere around 4 to 5 weeks out from the meet, I'm going to go ahead and stop squatting with my briefs. I have to give my body a chance to readjust to squatting raw again. Plus, most importantly, I've got to figure out what my raw numbers are going to be. I've got to figure out what I'm going to open with, different things like that. I know on the opposite end, it's kind of the opposite for geared guys. You guys will run, just your briefs for quite a while, and then when you get X amount of weeks out from the meet, then you're starting to throw your suits on, different things like that. So it's kind of the opposite. I'm going to start from the beginning with my gear on, and then as I get close to that meet, like I said, 4 to 5 weeks out, depending on how many weeks your cycle is, I'm going to pull that gear off and I'm going to start hitting just my raw squat so I can figure out where it's at, what my openers are going to be, so on and so forth. There's still a few things that I may add in. I've actually done raw training cycles before where back when I didn't have briefs, where I implemented some of the geared lifters training things as far as like reverse band squats, reverse band deadlifts. Just another way to overload training. When I didn't have the briefs, I was still getting some overload stuff in. So knowing how to use all that stuff as well, take advantage of that as well.
What would you say when you were training for the raw meet? When did you stop implementing gear?
Well, I was a little bit different than a lot of people because I pretty much stopped in everything immediately because I was broke. I couldn't use any kind of gear. I couldn't hold a bar, for a long time. So I just didn't use gear. I probably went out of gear for about 8 months. After I got my pec fixed. In terms of when I would use it, what are you asking here?
I thought you put the briefs on a little bit here and there, during the cycle, just to take a little more load.
No,
okay.
I love geared lifting, so that it would have served me well to do that, but I know if I'd have put the briefs on,
You would have wanted to put everything.
they're not coming off.
All right, so let's rephrase the question. Yeah, let's rephrase the question. Say you're doing another raw meet. When would you use those? How many weeks out would you use those? When would you implement those into a system?
They would be perfect for, like he's saying, overload training in the beginning. And it's kind of like what I'm getting ready for a cycle now.
12, 14, 16 weeks?
That far out, or even closer. I would run it up to probably 8 to 10 weeks out, because that will keep my body, my central nervous system, tuned up to using those kind of weights, that heavy weight. So when I do, I'm squatting 850, 900 in briefs, and then I pull the briefs off, 700 don't feel like anything.
Right.
Exactly.
That's the whole idea right there.
Yeah.
That's what
we're trying to get.
That's where I was wanting to go with the whole situation. When you do enough gear training and then you pull them off, the weights feel so light.
They do.
You don't even think about them. Honestly, I couldn't squat 1,000 to save my life right now. But when I'm squatting, I'm thinking in terms of 1,000. Mm-hmm. So when I see 500-600 pounds on the bar, I'm like, even though my body's not responding as well, You know,
Mentally.
I'm mentally there with 1,000 pounds, or 900 pounds, or 1,100 pounds, whatever. I still think in those terms, and I think thinking in those terms is another way for a raw lifter or a gear lifter, but a raw lifter especially as well, to learn how to mentally deal with a heavier weight. So you take the weight on your back, and then when you go to your raw stuff, the weight doesn't feel so bad, and you feel, the feeling part of it and the confidence part of it is just as important as the lifting part of it. So, and that's another way to that's where I was trying to go with that.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for, popping a weight out of the rack and being like,
That ain't nothing.
this is my, my opener or maybe my second attempt, and it feels, like a warm up on your back. So that's an instant confidence boost. Like I tell people, especially when they're in the hole, my big thing, one of my cues is to get after it, go after it hard. And you can't do that when you're tentative, when the weight feels heavy, when you feel like, oh, I don't know if I want to go down low, you got to go after it. You got to have that confidence, and that's kind of what that can give you, definitely.
I agree.
And one last thing, and we'll wrap it up here. I think with the gear stuff, and this is just me personally, is when you get to that bottom part of the hole and you're coming up with the squat, my brain is automatically as fast and as hard as I can. That's what he was talking about earlier. So my reversal strength to me felt like it got better with using gear over time.
Yep.
The ability to transition from the descent to the ascent. That critical period. He does a little bit of dip now that works really well. I'm not sure on your end of it, but I just listen to the coach, and then up, and then I poured everything into the lift on the way up, and you'll also hear a lot about compensatory acceleration training. All that means is you continuously go as fast as you can all the way to the top. You don't let up. Because a lot of times you can get out of the hole and then you can drift to the top. You can drift to lockout. That doesn't teach you how to push heavy weights fast all the time. You have to push them from the bottom to the top as fast as you can. So that's my little bit of extra in there.
Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it all up.
Hope you guys were able to get some good information today. Thanks for tuning in, of course.
Yeah, if we weren't clear on something, or we got off the track and we talked a little bit about something that you want to hear more about, just hit us up on Facebook, or give us a call. We're on Facebook all the time, Twitter, Tumblr, all that kind of stuff. So if you got questions, maybe we touched on something you want to know more about, or we didn't cover something that you want to know more about, let us know. We'll be happy to to respond to questions. We'll do a short little video if it's a few questions, but we're definitely here to help you guys. So if you have questions, let us know. Maybe we have the answers, but if we don't, we'll find them for you.
Is there an email they can send an email to if they wanted to?
Yeah, if you got questions and you want to send them to splittingstraps@gmail.com, you can do it. We're always on email, so definitely hit us up on that.
All right, thanks for tuning in to this week's Ustream. I'm Spud. These are Spud Inkers.
That's right.
We'll talk with you next week. Thanks.
Happy Halloween. Go eat some
Oh
candy.
yeah, eat a lot.
Be safe out there. Yeah,
We
it
did.
seemed like it.
Wow.
An hour and 8 minutes.
We did, in fact, do that. How can you walk after sitting on that ball for 8 hours?
Not very well, dude. And I got a bleedy head, so.
Yeah, you could have
You
bled.
guys better be done.
Yeah, you could have bled to death.
Oh, Joe's bad.
I'm gonna throw these in the truck.
Sorry,
and
you
go
were
grab
wrong.
lunch real quick, and then I will be back in just a second. We'll clock in and get going.
Oh, this stinky.
Your mom coming in at
2:30.
2:30. Perfect.